Hey everyone, so I'm going to use the map this time around to explain the Second Punic War. It was pretty epic in scale, and you can see the different colors. I'll explain these are different players in the game. You can see the scale where basically the war includes the battles in Italy, Spain, North Africa, all throughout the Western Mediterranean, even some in Gaul. There's also some engagements, what's called the First Macedonian War over in Greece. So the scale in this for the ancient world was pretty large. It was probably the most important war, and it was the war that we get the famous Hannibal and the his war elephants and crossing the Alps. So kind of left you off after the first Punic War, and Rome is now the preemptive naval power. People always think I was talking to somebody the other day, and they mentioned about well, Rome was never very good at navy. Well, after the first Punic War, that's a total lie. They were the premier naval power from here on. They controlled the sea in the Second Punic War pretty much throughout. So you see Carthage struggles a little with. They actually had very good sailors, very good fleet at this point. In fact, it's solely how they defeat Macedon is with their navy. So the whole rumor about Romans not being good at navy. No, at this point they're kind of it's like 180. Rome's the naval power. Carthage has to defeat them in land, which is what they attempt. So between the wars, Rome, you can see they got some red over here on the coast of the Adriatic. They kind of fought some wars with what's called Illyria, and it's an area what is now Croatia, all those Yugoslavian countries, Bosnia. It's kind of this area right here. If you can see my mouse cursor going through. So Rome had taken. These are really more like allied tribes, but kind of like Epirus and some of the parts of Illyria they had taken to kind of help defeat the piracy that was going on there. So they got some lands that will come into play when Macedon tries to jump into the war, but kind of not really into play at the very end of the war. They also control, as you can see, Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, all stuff they gained from the First Punic War. And Carthage, meanwhile, has been expanding as well in Spain. And there was a descendant of Hamilcar named Hannibal. I can't remember if he's the son or the grandson or the nephew. I can't remember the exact relationship. I should have looked that up before I jumped in. I meant to look that up for this meeting, but before I did this podcast. But basically, he's related to Hamilcar Barca, Hamilcar Barca was the guy that came in at the end of the First Punic War and nearly defeated the Romans in Sicily. And he was related to Hasdrubal the Fair, which was Hannibal's father, and of course Hannibal Barca. And they've been taking territory in Spain. And Carthage, in the First Punic War, really was only in this southern part of Spain, but they're starting to expand inland. And they capture a bunch of mines, and they get really wealthy. So Carthage kind of is able to rebuild its wealth despite Rome's attempt to keep them down. And Rome is distracted. Rome's out fighting other people. I think they fight the Illyrians, as I alluded to. They fight like other barbarian tribes. So even though Rome is growing in power, and of course this war is in 230. It's kind of the background. It starts around 218 BCE. The First Punic War was in the 250s, so it's about 20 years or less past. Because the First Punic War was 23 years long. This war won't be as long. It will last about 17 years. So still a long war, but not as long. It will be the closest Rome comes to defeat effectively until the 5th century. Nobody will threaten Rome like Hannibal does until the 5th century AD with Alaric the Visigoth, who would capture Rome. But so Hannibal has been expanding his power in Carthage. Meanwhile, he's grown up with a desire for revenge against Rome. And Rome eventually takes a note of Carthage's constant expansion in Spain. And there's this river. It's actually the longest river in Spain. It's about where the green stops here in Spain. It goes through northern Spain. It's called the Ebro River. I mean, it's a pretty prominent river even today up in Catalonia. So Rome makes a treaty with Carthage saying you're not allowed to cross this river. And eventually Carthage, to start it out, they begin the besiege of a city. I kind of made it reddish right here. Let me zoom in a little bit. In northern Spain, called Saguntum. Saguntum's a Greek city-state that's in Spain, close to maybe Barcelona. I don't know if that's. I'll try to get the locations about as exact as possible. Well, Rome's like, enough is enough. They gather an army. It was actually by one of the commanders was Scipio. He's not the Scipio yet. He's his father, but he among two generals. They're sent to relieve Saguntum, and they head out to they'll land here in Massilia, which is a ally of Rome. It's a Greek city in southern France. What I said was now become modern Marseille. I went over that in the First Punic War. Well, this Roman army's resupplying here. Hannibal, meanwhile, he takes Saguntum and he starts crossing over into Gaul. And let me kind of see if I can draw a little kind of green arrow. Give me a second here. So Hannibal makes his pathway, and he's going up here. And he intentionally goes north of this area where Massilia is to try to avoid the Roman army. And he fights a battle right here called the Battle of the Rhone Crossing. And it's mostly against Celtic Gallic tribes, Gauls, not against Romans. He defeats them, but that kind of wears his army out a little bit. He loses a few of his elephants there. Then he crosses the Alps. And he loses a lot of his elephants when he crosses the Alps. And it's a long, arduous journey. He loses a lot of men. Meanwhile, the Roman army arrives in Saguntum. And they would actually get bogged down in northern Spain. Publius Cornelius Scipio is the name of the commander. But they would get bogged down in northern Spain. I think Hannibal actually defeats Scipio at the Battle of Ticinus, which is somewhere. Actually, that's here in the Alps. No, Scipio wasn't deployed yet. It was a different general. My apologies. He defeats Scipio somewhere here. They don't know the exact location. They think it was near the Alp River or near the Alp Mountains, trying to cross into what was called at that time Cisalpine Gaul, which is northern Italy today. And actually, interestingly, Rome was in the process of conquering Cisalpine Gaul. They were in the middle of a war with the Gallic tribes. So Rome had one advantage: they had a lot of troops already in northern Italy ready to fight Hannibal. But the disadvantage is they're already in the state of war, and Hannibal finds willing allies, especially after winning that first battle, and he bolsters his troops up to 60,000. In fact, throughout the war, his army would be composed mostly of Gallic tribesmen or soldiers from Cisalpine Gaul, which is in northern Italy. So Hannibal would boost his forces. So let me kind of draw. I'm going to draw a green here, even though it's not technically Carthage. I'm going to draw kind of a green right here to say, hey, this is where he's getting a lot of his men. Interestingly, and this will come back to bite Carthage in this war, the Carthaginian Miet, remember I told you about it in the First Punic War, they never declare war on Rome. They called this, in Carthage, it was called Hannibal's War, not Carthage's War. So he would get throughout the war very limited support. Rome would, at the onset of the war, fortify Sicily, and they would actually besiege and win a naval battle and take Rhodes. And then they would take this island right here. Oh, my bad. They would take this island right here, and the Roman Navy would bottle down Carthaginian shipment with a blockade. And Rome focused its navy here because they want to protect Sicily and Sardinia, and they bogged down the Carthaginian navy. So Carthaginian navy has limited ability to support Hannibal. They will try to at times, but for the most part, Hannibal's on his own. So he starts winning a trio, and Hannibal wins this first battle of Ticinus, the enter the Alps. There's a second battle below. He fights another consular army at the Battle of Trivia, and this one's led by Tiberius Sempronius Longus. And he smashes his army, and basically Carthaginian tactics usually involve enveloping the Roman army, which kind of had the Battle of Ticinus was kind of against light Roman infantry, mostly what they call velites, which I kind of explained that in a previous video. They're kind of like skirmisher units. They threw spears at you. They're kind of designed to be more like a range attack unit and hit you, run away. Maybe light swordsmen that could jump in and flank people, but they were not the main heavy Roman infantry. And that really at the Battle of Ticinus, he mostly fought light infantry led by Scipio. And Scipio they actually kind of fought, and then Scipio continued on to try to take Saguntum. That's where I kind of got messed up. Hannibal would use what's called Numidian light cavalry. And there was two Numidian tribes. This will come up later. That's why I called them out here. They're both kind of Massacili and the Messacil. And The Messicilla will stay loyal to Carthage throughout and be a bolster. He has a lot of troops from them. This is where Carthage mostly recruited its Numidian horsemen. The Massicili allied with Carthage initially, but later on they'll side with Rome, you'll find out, and that kind of helps bring down Carthage. So they've crossed into northern Italy. He wins the Battle of Trebia against he basically lures the Romans. It's in winter, lures them into an icy river, and basically engages the infantry while Carthage hidden. So he engages the Roman army, where his infantry clashes with them and bogs them down. Meanwhile, he had hidden a detachment by one of his loyal generals, Mago Barca, who's I think related to him, and they came out of hiding, out of the woods, horsemen, and they came in and ran into the Roman rear, basically enveloping them. So, and that's common Hannibal tactics would be to envelop the enemy armies, and basically what enveloping is when you totally surround the Roman army. You basically push them in the middle and you envelop them. The Cannae would be his most famous engagement where he does that. Initially, he's doing it by hiding his horsemen or hiding the Numidian horsemen, hiding elements of his army and having them come out and surprise the Romans. He's using the terrain against them, even though he's not familiar with it, ironically. The biggest battle would happen now. He would cross down into Italy. So that battle, the Battle of Trebia, was kind of the two. Right now he's only engaging the Roman armies that were already fighting in Sicily and Gaul. But at this point, now Rome realizes he's a threat. He crosses over into Italy, and there's another battle called Lake Trasimene, which is one of his most famous victories outside of Cannae. And the Romans had regrouped, sent a very large army. I think it was 40,000. They raised in Rome to deal with them. This was the army to deal with them. It was led by... this one was led by Gaius Flaminius. And so Gaius Flaminius led the army. This was an army that was raised. It's the first army, basically, it's designed to deal with Hannibal. Sure, he had beaten pretty sizable Roman armies in northern Italy, but at this point, he'd not really quite gotten an army that was truly ready for him. This army was specifically raised to deal with Hannibal. And how he defeats this army from Flaminius is he effectively, it's called, of course, it's around a lake. It's why they call it a lake. He basically uses the lake shore to hide his army, and there's, of course, fog, and they're hidden in the hills. And basically, the Romans were effectively led down there into an ambush. So the Romans didn't even know. He basically was maneuvering around to stay away from the Roman army. Once again, using movement and terrain, which is a common theme throughout this war. A lot of the battle tactics is not just about maintaining the army, but how you move it around and position yourself into a spot where you can take advantage of your enemy's weakness. And that's why I love that Hannibal and Hamilcar game I showed off during the First Punic War. It plays a lot into that. You got to be careful about how you fight in the game. You can't it's not just a go in there and use battle tactics. You got to choose when to fight them and where. So he defeats this army in a spectacular ambush. Loses very little men. The Romans were basically not allowed to even set up formations. It kind of reminds me of the Teutoburg Forest, which that's really the Imperial era. I don't know if I ever get to it, but it was an ambush. The Romans lose a sizable force, and their army's broken. And effectively, Hannibal's now got inroads into Italy. And so he starts going down the Italian peninsula. And what he's doing, he's trying to turn... I told you in the first video about the different people in Italy, the Samnites and other tribes throughout Italy, that Rome is defeated at this point. Some of them have been Roman for now half a century, but he's trying to appeal and trying to break loyalty to Rome, and trying to also, I think, force Rome into some kind of favorable treaty. And the Romans are very stubborn throughout this war, and that actually will aid them. So eventually, there's a new general that takes over in Rome. I thought his name was Fabian. I'm sorry, Fabian. So there's another Roman leader, consul, takes over named Fabian. Fabian, they call it the Fabian strategy. So his strategy in dealing with Hannibal is just not fight Hannibal. So whenever Hannibal takes a city or does a raid, Fabian waits till Hannibal moves on. Then he comes back and retakes the city. And Fabian's goal is to wear Hannibal down. But the Roman populace starts to get tired of him. So eventually they elect two consuls this time. and raise a massive army, one of the largest armies the Roman Republic has raised to date. It's over 60,000, 70,000. This is about 100,000 Romans that they raise, and this is the Battle of Cannae. And Cannae is down here in southern Italy. It's somewhere kind of. Let me put down a green. So this is Cannae. I'm going to kind of, because it's one of Carthage's biggest victories. So the Battle of Cannae, how things work, and it might be better for me to pause this and do it, show it with my hands. I'll do that. Okay, everyone, I'm going to kind of use this, step away from the map and use my hands to kind of talk about the battle and just show it off in my hands. But the Battle of Cannae, now the number is 86,000 Romans, and they raised two consuls to lead the battle. And so the biggest army they've raised. And Fabian's not out of the picture because Fabian's too, I don't want to say he's too smart, but he's kind of like, they get tired of the whole guerrilla war, not fighting Hannibal directly face to face. They're like, we could beat Hannibal. Let's just go be Romans and beat him. And their mentality and arrogance here and their aggressiveness is actually their downfall. So they get Carthage in what should have been favorable terrain, a flat field. And what happens is the Roman army just marches at Carthage. There's no strategy. There's there's a running meme on there about this battle where the consul they're talking about like guys and girls, and it had like the women were like all about protective, and they said, why do guys not live? Why women live longer than guys? They had the guys like, I got the gods on my side. I'm going to march to battle. Yeah, it kind of because they didn't have any strategy. So here's the meme I was actually doing in the video. I thought it was kind of funny. I wanted to kind of explain it because I didn't make any sense in the video about it. But you can see here it's basically two women at the front asking why men don't live or boys don't live longer. They're saying, yeah, it's really weird. And then you get down here, he's like talking about, and this is referencing the Battle of Cannae. He's like, what is your strategy? My strategy, I think he had actually 86,000, but 77,000 Roman soldiers in Jupiter's favor. I don't need a strategy. So that kind of sums up pretty well how Rome approached Cannae. They thought they could just go out there and overwhelm them and smash them, and didn't quite work out. So I guess that's why women outlive men, because they don't rush off to stupid battles they can't win. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll catch you guys later. I wanted to do this as a quick insert into the video. Also, I think early on I was talking about a naval battle with Rome. I called Malta Rhodes. A few other errors. I think I called Corinth Carthage or vice versa a couple of times too. So made some mistakes in this video, so bear with me. They didn't have any strategy, and they went at the Carthaginian army, and Hannibal weakens his rear. So what happens is as they march at him, he just retreats, and he retreats. Meanwhile, there's parts of his army, mostly the horsemen, are coming in from the side, and the Romans come in. And guess what? Envelopment. His army is surrounded. The Roman army. And even though they outnumber the Carthaginians, I think it was 3-1, they cannot maneuver around Carthage. They're surrounded a circle. And so like all these troops in the middle can't get to them. Only the ones on the corner of the Roman army can actually fight. They're the only ones that are useful. So once again, and that's what Hannibal's a master at, enveloping tactics. And he surrounds them with all his horsemen, most of his Numidian horsemen. His horsemen and he has Gallic cavalry now reinforced as well, and they surround the Roman army, and they slowly beat them down. And more Romans die in this battle than I think any other land battle until Teutoburg Forest. You have to go into almost an imperial era. Maybe there's one called start to see as well Carrhae, where Rome lost its whole army to Parthia, but it's a long time before Rome suffers a defeat like this, and it's devastating. Rome has no field army. Hannibal has the only army in Italy, and the Romans effectively, some of their allies start wavering. People think this is the end of Rome. Carthage has won. Of course, the Romans come back to Fabian. They're like, Fabian, take charge. Meanwhile, Roman cities like Capuca, Tarentum, they start siding with Carthage. They start letting Carthage in. And so you got all this situation where allies in Italy like Neapolis, Capua, I know Capua is the most famous one. They're defecting. They're joining Hannibal. And Hannibal wants to take Taranto. Actually, let me go to the back of the map to explain that one. That are now abandoning Rome due to the Battle of Cannae. Rome has no real field army to effectively engage Hannibal. They just lost almost 86,000 men at the Battle of Cannae. And Tarentum, which is right here, they were the one, if you remember the Pyrrhic War, they're the one that kind of started all allied with Pyrrhus of Epirus. So Hannibal wants to get a port available so he can get a Carthaginian fleet and somehow get support from Carthage. He thinks, okay, Carthage will go all in. Rome is starting to get overextended. Let's deal with them. Syracuse also defects at this time, and Macedon. There's an aggressive king of Macedon called Philip V, and he's going to come up again in my video after the Second Punic War, but he decides to take advantage and declare war on Rome as well. So now Carthage has an ally, Macedon. Macedon's raising a navy because what Macedon wants to do is take this coastline up here, Epirus and some of Illyria. He wants to. It's more ambition, but he also feels like he can weaken Rome. Well, you see this orange color, or kind of purplish orange color. This is a group that's called the Aetolian League, and they're a Greek. There's two big allied leagues of Greek cities in Greece that kind of fight against Macedon. There's the Aetolian League, and there's one down here in this corner called the Achaean League. And the Achaean League at times even owns Carthage. For a short period, it conquers Sparta and even owns Athens for a little bit. But the Achaean League and the Aetolian League are both rivals of Macedon. And they're kind of, I kind of mentioned it before, how a Greek city-state like Athens or Sparta rarely can stand alone now against Macedon. So what they're doing, they're banding together, especially some of the smaller Greek city-states. And so they're forming these leagues, and they elect a basilicus, like a king, or Strategos. Strategos is what they call it. Strategos, like a general that will lead them for that war, and they usually fight wars. Well, Rome calls upon the Aetolian League and then two other allies. They'll kind of call upon a lot of Rhodes, this island right here, and Pergamum, which is over here in kind of like western Turkey. There are two other big Greek city-states. So they'll kind of keep Macedon bottled down, and there will be a naval battle here where Rome defeats the Macedonian navy. Macedon promised to send Carthage troops through Tarentum. That's another reason Hannibal's trying to take that city. But their navy's defeated. They never really are able to get any true support other than like a small, like 1,000 soldiers or something, expedition force that makes it over to them. And they're not in the war very long. Rome forced them to the peace table fairly quickly. Syracuse is another major problem. Rome begins a long siege of the city of Syracuse. And there's a famous, you've heard the name before, probably a lot in fantasy and stuff, Archimedes. Okay, so the city of Syracuse comes to our Caesar for, and Archimedes uses all kinds of weird technologies. According to rumors, he even had these mirrors that reflected the sun's light to create beams that could burn Roman ships. So the Roman fleet defeats the Syracusan fleet and bottles them up in the city. And the Roman army besieges it by land. Eventually, the city holds out for almost, I think it's like 5 or 6 months. And basically, it actually happens at night. The Romans breach a wall at night and storm the city. And they kill basically a lot of people, including Archimedes is killed in this attack. So it's interesting. I could do like a video on the siege of Syracuse if you want me to. But Syracuse went after the Battle of Cannae, switched sides and joined Carthage, and basically Rome would destroy them. And that's the last time Syracuse is on its own. From here on out, it's just part of the Roman state. There's no more independent city of Syracuse. Well, Fabian continues his strategy where he basically fights Hannibal where Hannibal's not. So they retake Syracuse, and this becomes a Roman strategy from here on out. Don't fight Hannibal, fight Carthage everywhere else. So they defeat Syracuse, Rome's ally. They defeat Macedon. Syracuse, Hannibal's ally. They defeat Macedon, Hannibal's ally. They retake Capua when Hannibal's gone, and they're very harsh and threatening when they retake some of these allies that betrayed him. And so these city-states start to not open their doors to Hannibal anymore, and his supplies start to dwindle. He's eventually forced back up into northern Italy. And a lot of people, there's been a lot of debate with at the time or later on, ancient historians arguing why didn't he take Rome after the Battle of Cannae? Because there's no army to defend Rome effectively. The logic was probably being he didn't have the logistical supply or siege equipment to do it. But some in Carthage blamed him after the war. You should went after Rome itself, and he never did. And by now, he's starting to be uprooted from southern Italy because the Romans keep attacking him where he's not, and that becomes the strategy. Meanwhile, over in Spain, the Romans start winning battles. There's a Roman army throughout this entire time that Hannibal's. This It's been years that Hannibal's been in Italy. It's been sent over for years around southern Spain, just harassing the Carthaginian position in Spain, and it's slowly built up. It's gotten allies among barbarian tribes, Iberian tribes that don't like Carthage, and it's led by the Scipio family and some other general. And they this is when the proconsul I mentioned in the government comes along, where they were made proconsuls and never really relieved. And so there's kind of like a Roman army that's just basically making a living over there. Well, and they've had a few battles. One of them was a kind of a unique naval victory where they actually take the Carthaginian navy. Carthage actually had naval supremacy in just this little area, and they were lured into a river, and the Romans were able to actually capture their ships by treachery. And while the Carthaginians weren't even on the ships, they basically disembarked, and then the Romans came in and took the ships and left the Carthaginians behind. There's a bunch of little interesting battles they do here. They start recruiting allies among barbarian tribes that start to not like Rome, and they eventually start winning battles in Spain itself. And it finally culminates in 207 BC with the fall of Carthago Nova, or New Carthage, and Rome basically takes Spain. And that's the first big blow to Hannibal and Carthage. They defeat the army in Spain, and the rest of the Carthaginian army in Spain starts to head this way, the same path that Hannibal took to cross the Alps. And it's led by Hannibal's Hasdrubal Barca, which is one of Hannibal's, I think, brother or cousin. So he leads this army, and on the way, it's defeated at a battle called Materus. Once again, the Romans are able to meet up with it. I think this battle actually happens in what's now France. Don't quote me on it, but there's a battle called Materus. And the Hannibal's army by this time in Italy had dwindled dramatically. He was hoping to get these reinforcements and go back to war with Rome and maybe bring Rome to the table. Well, his reinforcements are wiped out. Hannibal's position becomes tenuous, and he ends up fleeing on a ship, kind of like Napoleon did with Egypt, kind of end up fleeing back to Carthage. Because at this point, now the Roman army in Spain was starting to threaten Carthage, Africa itself. And this culminates in a general called Scipio. He later becomes Scipio Africanus, but Publius Cornelius Scipio, he was the one that took New Carthage. He actually was the son of his dad. Scipio had started the war in Spain, and basically he had taken his son along with him. His dad actually died, and the son continued the war on behalf of his dad. And Scipio is a pretty good general, probably the best Roman general of the war. And Carthage, he finally gets to meet his chance to meet Hannibal. The Romans invade Africa, and there's a battle called Zama, and it's kind of the last big battle in the war, and it happens in North Africa. And Scipio Africanus matches up with Hannibal, and he's brought a lot of his troops that fought with him in Spain, who were veterans fighting the Carthaginians in a campaign that they had won. Another thing about Scipio, when he entered Africa, he got help. There's a kind of a Numidian civil war where the Misalil tribe and the Maseli tribe, they kind of fight over what's now Algeria. That's where kind of Numidia is based at. And Rome kind of plays that, and the two tribes don't really, they're kind of like rivals, and Rome gets one of the tribes on its side. Scipio does, and this tribe actually helps supply the Roman army in Africa and help defeat them. Helps the Roman army to battle Zama, as the Roman army is bolstered now by the same Numidian cavalry that Carthage has, just from a different tribe. And they actually fought several battles against the Messil the Romans would, and bring them down to basically a surrender that favors the other tribe. Hannibal is relying a lot on it. He has a reinforced Carthaginian army with elephants, and he relies on this elephant charge. Well, Scipio Africanus kind of did the same thing Alexander the Great did at the Battle of, I think it was Gaugamela or Ipsus, one of the two, where he basically opens a hole in his army, allows the elephants to run through, then has all his javelins, throwers, and slingers stuff attack the elephants and basically break them up. And so the elephant threat is neutralized. And then actually Scipio has more horsemen, cavalry than Hannibal, so he uses cavalry to come out and attack Hannibal and breaks up. And he kind of envelops Hannibal. Basically, the same tactic Hannibal does with the Romans all throughout the war. And basically, that's the end. Hannibal was defeated decisively. He did try to flee back to Carthage and raise another army, but at this point, Carthage refuses to keep the war going. And Rome basically comes out of it as the owners of the Western Mediterranean, and effectively they're going to take Sicily and Gaul. They start their long incursion in Spain, so Spain falls under Rome, and they keep going there. They would actually also get land. They slowly start extending their realm into France. It's kind of, and Massilia would kind of, not by war, but it'd fall under Roman rule as well. They never actually fought a war. It just ended up, they just ended up joining the Romans eventually. They, even into, I think, the late Imperial era, they were kind of still independently ran, but they were clearly under Roman influence and protection because they were kind of on their own against the Gauls, and they had nobody to really go to but Rome, effectively. So Rome's now expanding into parts of what's now France. They're in Spain. They're starting to build what we call the Roman Empire, slowly but surely. And of course, after the war, they'll look east. Hannibal actually is banished from Carthage. I think it's part of the peace treaty. And he'd go on to serve in the Seleucid Empire. Remember my first video? I talked about them. And they'll probably come up again in the next video. But they are over here in what's now Syria. They control a lot of what's now Turkey, Syria, going into Iraq with Babylonia and stuff. Syracuse is now gone. There's no real threat anymore. Carthage has lost a lot of territory. Really, I think they kind of lost all their area in Africa as well over there. So they're really limited mostly what's now Tunisia, and they would be a second-rate power. As I stated before, and I'm not going to get to it in this video, there would be a third Punic War. It would basically be Rome massacring Carthage. It wouldn't be real much of a war. Where I said the Mede and Carthaginian government let down Hannibal, after Cannae, had they thrown all their effort in money, built up the navy, supported Macedon, tried to find more allies, that was when Rome was at its weakest. After the Battle of Cannae, Rome would not be that vulnerable again until effectively what we call the fall of the Roman era, which is the fall of the Roman Empire, which would be another, 600 years in the future, 700 years. That's when Rome was the most vulnerable. Hannibal had Rome beaten at that point. Hannibal is criticized by the Carthaginians and others for his inactivity, not trying to go take Rome itself. Granted, it's long debated with historians, would he have had the capability? Rome had strong city walls at the time. It would have been a siege. He might have not have been able to supply his army, or not have had the equipment to take it. But effectively, Rome was vulnerable, and they didn't have an army to defend Rome. And Hannibal never took advantage of it. Great general, arguably one of the greatest generals in all of antiquity. Like Pyrrhus, two videos ago, he failed to accomplish anything significant in his lifetime, sadly. And Carthage kind of collapsed after the Second Punic War. Once again, it's kind of like the First Punic War. Rome's endurance and novelty of what's allowed them to win. Rome at this time is still a very strong state, morally and disciplined. It's not just territory or tactics with them. They're strong people. They're people that don't give up. That's going to start going downhill. With prosperity, it's a common trope in history. With prosperity becomes, you grow weaker. People are less, they become selfish versus selfless. Sadly, I feel like it's a problem in our world today. With a lot of countries, you got a lot of it's about I and me, not enough about us. And Rome at this time was about us, but they're going to quickly become about I and me. And so this is kind of, I'm going to have one more run when Rome's move east, and I'm going to lead up to 146 BC, and that's the end of what I'd planned. I'd called part two, which is kind of like the Roman Golden Age and Rome expansion era. Even though Rome will continue to expand in what I call part three. Part three is going to focus more on why the Republic fell, what what uh what traits, how Rome changed. It's going to get a lot into. First, you got Marius and Sulla, then you got Pompey, Caesar, Crassus, the first triumvirate, and Spartacus, and then you get into the second triumvirate, which is Lepidus, Octavian, and Mark Antony. And of course, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and the end of them allows Augustus or Octavian to become the first emperor of the Roman Empire. And I'll stop after that with Octavian. I don't plan to do the Roman Empire unless people really want me to do that side of it. But yeah, at this point in history, the Romans are still a very strong people. They're very Italian-focused people as well. The provinces had gotten less attention. They'll start. You'll see this red start expanding more across the map, and in some ways, Rome gets stronger, but they also get weaker the more this red spreads across the map. So kind of the expansionism that they start to enter into slowly starts to creep up to hurt them. But Rome's now in Spain. They're now pushing into the east. They got the islands. They'll be in Africa shortly as well, North Africa. And if you know, once Rome, by the end of the Roman Republic era, they'll control basically almost all of France and this western part of Europe. They'll control this whole western chunk of Africa. They'll be going into Egypt. Octavian adds Egypt to it. And they'll have the Middle East. They'll have Greece. So yeah, Rome's going to start expanding drastically, and in the Empire era, they kind of expand to the Rhine and the Danube. So where we draw the Rhine and the Danube River, that was the borders of the Roman Empire. Sometimes they went beyond it, but they never really stayed too long, maybe 20, 30 years. They'd also kind of stop right here in Syria, but they would sometimes go in Iraq in the Imperial era. But they didn't really go out to the east like Alexander did. They talked about it at times, but not. This area was kind of hard to. You could defeat the enemies out there, but it was hard to control it. But yeah, that's kind of the end of the Second Punic War. I likely did not do it justice. There's multiple battles in Spain, many battles in Italy. I covered the major ones. You got the big three at the start, which are Tecanigus, which basically allows Hannibal to enter Italy. Trebia, which is Hannibal's first true victory over a full Roman consular army. Lake Trasimene, which is the first the battle in northern Italy that really is the first real army sent to directly defeat Hannibal, and he defeats. And then Cannae, which is a crushing blow to Rome. And of course, I covered Zama and Syracuse as well, which were kind of in Carthago Nova, which today it's actually Cartagena today in Spain. But so in fact, a lot of these city names that we're stumbling into actually still exist today. I think Saguntum is what became Taranto. I can't remember, but there's several of these cities that actually are still around this day. Carthage is not far from modern Tunis in Tunisia. So somebody say Syracuse still exists today. Messina, who I brought up, still exists today. Taranto, Neapolis became Naples. So a lot of these cities still exist in Europe today, interestingly. But yeah, this is kind of the end of the Second Punic War. The scale was kind of this video didn't quite do justice for it, but the scale was pretty epic of this battle, or this war. So next up would be Rome Goes East, which will be the Macedonian Wars, the Roman-Syrian War against the Seleucids, and their downfall. And then I'll stop it at 146 BC, which is it's kind of the high point of Rome, and it involves two Roman armies on two sides of the world. One destroys Carthage, the other destroys Corinth and Greece, and it kind of spells the end of both Greece and Carthage as even threats to Rome or even nations at that point. All of Greece and all of Carthage fall under Roman rule, and that's when effectively Rome has no more true Mediterranean rivals anymore. There's some nations to the east like Parthia that will give them trouble, and the barbarian tribes, but at this point all the major civilized powers that can threaten Italy are effectively gone. Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. I hope you guys are enjoying this series. More to come. Next up, Rome goes east. We're going to deal a lot with Greece and the politics around the Greeks. So, they defeated the Carthaginians now. It's on to the Greeks.